Today we have with us the most insane DAC ever created. Why is it insane? Well, it has 128 DACs in total. This is the iBasso D16, and it's called D16 because it has 16 sets of 8A DACs, which basically amounts to 128 DACs. This is an implementation most similar to what Chord is doing with their Mojo and Hugo series, although the equivalent is that D16 has more DACs than either Mojo or Hugo. While in my full written review I didn't draw a comparison with either the Mojo or the Hugo, I plan on doing this in the video because I had some time to compare them head to head after I published the full written review. So here it is. The craziest DAC made by iBasso. Now this is a DAC amp, so it is a unit. We should remove the jacket. It can actually slip right off. So the actual unit looks kinda like this. It is a full metallic unit. It has all of those ridges on it. And we have a little display at the front. Although the whole front is made of glass, the display is very, very small and it only indicates the current power, the current input, the data rate, and that's about it. And of course, it allows you to set some of the settings that D16 has. Starting with the physical unit, it doesn't feel very heavy, so this is about 300 grams, which is much lighter than either iBasso DX320 Max Ti or Kern Acro CA1000T, both of which it has a very similar and sometimes even better performance than. Now, at the back we have two USB Type-C inputs, and this is pretty important because you need to populate both to charge it and to use it at the same time. There is a separate data port and a separate charging port. If you don't populate the charging port, the battery doesn't charge. This is great if you want to preserve the battery life, but at the same time it's a bit inconvenient that you have to charge it manually every single time you turn it on. We have an on-off switch, and that is the only way you can turn it on and off, and it is at the back. It is a very minuscule switch there. You can flip it for on or off, and we have a coaxial/optical input. At the front we have two headphone outputs, one in the 4.4mm balanced format and one in the 3.5mm single-ended format. The balanced format has more power, better channel separation, better instrument definition and a better sound at the cost of having a very slightly higher noise floor. For most people it won't be noticeable. You can set both of them to act as lineouts, so it can act as a full-size DAC, and nowadays HiFi is making a cable that goes from 4.4mm balanced to full-size XLR, so you can use something like D16 for a desktop setup. That is really interesting, and I will be exploring it for that usage, likely in the review for those cables from HiFi. The volume can be set from two volume wheels, and we have separate volume for DAC and for amp. The amp volume has steps, and it is one of those stepped volume attenuators. This is known to be the best implementation for a volume ever, because it has the best channel matching, which means that you will get absolutely the same sound in both channels. The only drawback of having this kind of stepped attenuator being that you have a very limited number of steps. This being said, for me, high gain with the stepped attenuator has been enough for most EMs and headphones. But if you feel the need to fine-tune the D16 even further, you have gain levels and you also have 100 steps of DAC volume. So basically you can configure it with 24 steps, and in between those 24 steps you have 100 mini steps of DAC volume. That should be plenty of fine-tuning for the volume for basically everyone. Of course, this wouldn't matter if it wasn't made for both EMs and headphones, and I wouldn't be myself if I didn't tease you a bit about the PB5, which we'll also review both in writing and in video. PB5 is a tube amplifier, while D16 is a DAC and a solid-state amplifier. I prefer having a solid-state amplifier for general usage because the tube amplifier has its characteristic tube distortion. That tube distortion is really pleasing and some people are really into that, but I prefer having the more precise sound of the solid-state for certain headphones and EMs. Speaking of that driving power, D16 is able to drive every single headphone I have around the house from the balanced headphone output. With the single-ended output, it's a bit meager, to be honest. It's not the highest. It can drive most headphones, all of the EMs, but with hard-to-drive headphones it tends to struggle. So you can imagine that it will struggle with, for example, Dan Clark Audio Expanse or HiFi Manheshi 1000 version 2. Even with iBasso's on CR3, I feel that it's a bit struggling from the single-ended headphone output. And for EMs, I couldn't notice any kind of noise floor. While with PB5, you can call the characteristic tube sound to have a very, very slight amount of noise floor. With D16, there really isn't any. With most EMs, there isn't any noise floor to be heard. Of course, if you are extremely sensitive, if you are leaving it without any kind of music playing, and if you have that one EM which has 4 ohms of impedance or 8 ohms of impedance, there will be a very slight hissing. The only EM in my entire collection that I noticed that with is the Sui Ears HA Live 5. Right here, this is the only one. And I typically don't even mention this when it's just one, but just so you know, there was one that presented the faintest of hissing noise floors. I don't even know why, because on paper this shouldn't have such a high sensitivity, but either way, I noticed that during testing. This is the culprit. Back to D16, we should talk about the sound. First off, the technology is quite unique. It's uniquely implemented. This is a 1-bit DAC, and there are 128 of those DACs. In pairs, there are 16 pairs of 8A DACs. Those are pulse width modulation DACs, which is basically unique. The way it implements a FIR filter and such is most likely comparable to Chord Mojo and to Chord Mojo 2, to Chord Hugo 2. The only difference being that the D16 is considerably more dynamic and more detailed than either. The sound also has more refinement, it is tighter, and there is a much better bass extension and impact. D16 has the most dynamic sound out of all DAC amps that I've tested to date, especially if we are talking about portable DAC amps. There are some desktop DAC amps which are insanely powerful, and there you can have slightly different driving power and control, but those are first off pricier and second off not quite as portable as D16. This is the most portable one, and at the same time it is the most powerful DAC amp in the portable shape. The sound is what I would call absolutely transparent. It's hard to describe because it basically doesn't paint any specific color, but once you pay attention to the details, the textures and the dynamics, you understand that D16 has its own signature. It's really detailed, but at the same time it's extremely refined. It's refined in the way R2R DACs are, but it isn't soft as an R2R DAC. Most R2R DACs tend to be extremely soft. There is no hard impact, there is no hard edge, but there is also not a lot of dynamic with an R2R DAC. Typically they struggle a lot. D16 doesn't have any of those issues. It is clean, it is crisp, and it is extremely detailed. It's so rich in the mid-range, and also the bass is really rounded. It isn't one of those vibrato basses, so the bass doesn't break. It doesn't hit you like boom. It goes like whoa. You know, I try to vocalize those because it gives you a more straightforward example of what I'm talking about. Since all of those terms aren't really universal, they are in reviews and in audio, but I want you to understand what I mean by each of my sentences. The mid-range is really refined, detailed, but at the same time it bears control. It's really controlled. The distortion is the lowest that I've heard among all the DAC amps that I've heard. There is no trace of distortion, which means that you can pump the volume up to the maximum and you'll still hear a clear, controlled and refined sound with every single track. It's impressive. The treble is sharp, it extends up to the highest octaves, but at the same time it's also refined. You get this refinement across all of the frequency ranges with the D16. You never feel like the sound is colored in any way. It's really transparent, but at the same time, you never really feel like the sound is normal. You never tell to yourself, this is what I hear with any other DAC. It has a really characteristic presentation which takes away all of the hard edge, refines the sound, but also doesn't force it to sound refined. It's not one of those forcefully soft sounding DACs. It's more like a really hard but refined but rich sounding DAC. Like taking the best of Delta Sigma, which is the precision, clarity and detail and resolution, and taking the best of an R2R DAC, which is the refinement, richness, and also the smoothness in the transient response. And combining them together, you get what we have here, the D16 from iBasso. Since this is uniquely designed by iBasso and both the DAC and the technology is designed by them, I guess you can justify that it has this sound. The amplifier part is the same as in the iBasso DX320 Max Ti. And I got this question a lot from readers. Should you upgrade from having DX320 Max Ti and adding D16? To answer that question, I don't think so. You shouldn't do that. Why? Because this is quite large, the DX320 Max Ti is also quite large, so what I would suggest doing instead is grabbing a DAC like the DX180 or DX260 or a smartphone. Because although there is a slight difference between how smartphones and DACs sound as a transport, they are very close. You shouldn't notice the difference all that much, especially if you are out and about. So imagine this is the D16 with my smartphone. You see it's already quite bulky. This is the D16 together with the iBasso DX180. It's even bulkier. Every single setup has a limit to how bulky it should be versus how it sounds like. The DAC is improved above the DAC inside of DX320 Max Ti, but still the improvement doesn't justify adding this weight and this size to the already excellent flagship from iBasso. What I would add to the DX320 Max Ti is the PB5, because here, although this adds the bulk, it also adds a very different amplifier. It adds tubes, it adds an entirely new sound, and then you can justify to yourself adding a new unit. But here we have two units which are just too similar in the amplifier part to justify using the DX320 Max Ti as a transport. It's a bit wasteful, let's be honest. The DX320 Max Ti is still one of the best flagship DACs you can carry, and it's already quite large and heavy. So this D16 is better if you have a smaller DAC or a smartphone. Then you are set to have fun. Also, Tidal can take exclusive control for your smartphone, which means that with most smartphones, I can't really guarantee that it will work with all smartphones, but with most, you should have pure beat perfect playback. And if not with Tidal, there are some apps which allow for that. Of course, it wouldn't work system-wide, so your smartphone won't be able to have beat perfect playback for playing games, for example. But that's a limitation which I don't think you can have this tied to your smartphone and play. You see, it's quite thick. So there you have it. You should not upgrade your large high-end flagship DAC by adding the D16. You can add the PB5 or just purchase a different DAC, more entry-level option for the D16. But comparing the D16 with other flagship DACs, for example, it is considerably more refined, richer sounding, and also more dynamic than the Astellenkian Acro CA1000T. CA1000T is larger, heavier, it's not to be taken outdoors. It's way too large, too heavy, and the effort is not justified. But D16 actually beats it in dynamics, resolution, impact, richness in the mid-range, smoothness of the transient response. It's basically a better all-rounder DAC amp. I think it's a stretch to call the CA1000T a DAC. It's more like a DAC amp still, because it has a little DAC on it, but since you can't really take it anywhere, it's like a desktop DAC, which is my computer. I have a large screen on my left, and I think it's more convenient to listen to music to a computer if you have access to one. And if not, use your smartphone, control a streamer. There are so many options right now, and I'm really happy for that. But where there is a sea of options, I have not heard anything that comes quite at the same level of refinement, resolution, and clarity as D16. This is what I would consider to be the peak of DAC amp technology in 2024. Right now, it is the best one I've heard so far. And I think it will be the best DAC amp in the world for a pretty long time, because the technology iBasso developed here quite unique and quite effective. That's the most important aspect. As far as problems go, there are none. None that I could mention. There are no interruptions, there is no USB DAC delay, the response is instant, you can play games, you can watch movies on the computer. With the smartphone the same, you shouldn't have any kind of delay. It basically works like any other DAC amp, with the exception that it has a battery you must charge, it can be used portably, and it has a stepped volume attenuator and a DAC volume control. Among the settings you can set for it, you can go with amp and DAC gain from high to low. The input can be selected between USB, coaxial and optical. The output can be set between phone output and line output. You can set the display to stay on at all times, but it is an OLED display, and if you set it to stay on at all times, you may risk burning on the displays. The longest time it can be set to stay on is 30 seconds. If there is only one disadvantage to it, I mean, in my entire usage of it, that's you have to populate both of the Type-C inputs. It's a bit inconvenient at times to have two USB cables to drown to it, one for power and one for data, but that is the only thing that I would consider a negative. The battery life is great, around 7 to 8 hours of playback, especially if you are not at maximum volume, and for most people that should cover most usage scenarios. If you are listening for more than 7 hours straight of music, you should stop. You should stop. It can affect your hearing. You shouldn't have headphones on your head for more than 8 hours straight. That's too much. Take a pause, charge it a bit, then use it again. And the best thing you can do for yourself, and especially for me, is liking this video, subscribing to Audiophile Heaven, and share it with your friends if you found my video informative, enjoyable, and if you like spending time here, or if you like music. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope we'll see each other really soon. Bye!